Freedom Dive, Blue Zenith, Ascension to Heaven, and many more classics you've probably heard, even if you're a casual rhythm gamer. All of them are from a single composer known simply as Psy. Psy is considered to be one of the greatest composers to have ever touched rhythm games within the community, and his music is known for having an incredible beauty, whilst also remaining brutal enough to spawn some of the most difficult levels in rhythm game history. With a rhythm game artist as big as Psy, you have to wonder what the story behind him is. When did he start making music? And how did he get to the legendary status he's at today? Welcome to the history of rhythm game artists. Let's start from the beginning. Psy, whose real name is Yusuke Ishiwata, was born on the 5th July 1988 in Japan. Like most rhythm game artists, unfortunately not much is known about his childhood. However, what we do know is as a child he learned to play piano. This was his first exposure to the world of music, and sooner or later he would find himself playing video games. He said at this time the music he heard inside the video games shocked him, especially the music for boss stages, which he said used phrases that had genres between classical, jazz and hardcore. This inspired him to create similar things to this, and in 2005 he started producing his own music and uploading it online. He started off producing mainly classical, jazz and progressive rock compositions in his early years, as well as some trance and happy hardcore songs, and he used to upload these tracks onto a site called Musi, which used to be the go-to for Japanese indie artists, but has since been taken down. On his profile for this site, he said he played piano for 14 years and was the percussionist of the band club in his school for 6 years. Though keep in mind this snapshot is from 2012. It's unknown why he used to produce his music, but we know that all of his drum sounds were sampled from DTX Mania, which is essentially a drum version of Beatmania, and is one of the main rhythm games he played back in the day. The earliest track that can be found by him is called Dark Rain, which according to the site is a piano composition, but the audio for it is nowhere to be found. This was uploaded on the 23rd of December 2005, just over 15 years ago at the time of recording. The earliest track I could find made by him with audio available was a song called Black Cross, which is a progressive rock song uploaded onto the site on the 31st of January 2006. The song included this note with it: a fusion of game music and rock, and on the 1st of November the sound quality has been changed. Here's what this sounds like. The song used a combination of guitar and piano, and right off the bat you can tell Psy's musical ability is incredibly high to be able to create melodies this refined and complex. But you could also tell that he was a beginner when it came to production, the biggest indicator being how poorly the song is mixed. All of the instruments sound similar in volume, and as a result it's hard to tell what the main instrument of focus is. Additionally, the drums sound far too quiet, though this could have been Psy trying to get the effect of a soft drum sound. Nevertheless, it's satisfying to listen to, and you could tell the potential he had at the time. Another really cool track made by him during this period was a song called Death Piano, for 4 pianos, uploaded several months after on the 26th of September 2006, and this is ridiculous in every sense of the word. So crazy in fact that I literally can't describe just how insane it is to compose something like this and make it sound so good. Have a listen. So, the astute among you may have realised that the 4/4 pianos part of the title wasn't a joke. This song was in fact composed with 4 sets of digital pianos, which to be exact is 352 keys, as Psy himself also specifies. In the music world, this is called a quartet, which is when 4 instruments or voices are used together simultaneously, and instrumental quartets are known to be extremely difficult to compose because of how hard it is to get a decent sounding harmony out of all 4 instruments. Psy though absolutely crushes it. In the song there's all sorts of key and pitch changes between the pianos, amazing use of dynamics, mind-blowingly complex melodies, and to top it off, within the last 40 seconds he makes at least 17 BPM changes, ending with a section that's just short of 200 BPM. This should absolutely disprove any negative doubts you had about Psy's classical music ability, and as Psy himself said, this is a masterpiece. that will also be relevant later. 2007 was when he started to take music much more seriously, uploading music more frequently as a result, and also experimenting with more genres. Like a lot of his other early tracks, a lot of these are lost to time. However, there were two cool tracks I managed to salvage. A song called F, which is a progressive impromptu that has elements of hardcore, and is a remix of fantasy improvisations. And a song called Church Bells, which is a progressive song using a combination of the piano, drums, and different bell chime pitches. This is probably one of the best tracks by Psy within this period, and even includes a little guitar solo in the middle. Released this year was also, you all probably know it, the song that put OS players on ropes for years on end, Blue Zenith. This, however, wasn't the Blue Zenith we know today. This was actually an earlier version of the song, and like many of the others, I couldn't find the audio for it. By the end of 2007, he became increasingly active in music production, and in the next year, a whole new world opened up for him, which would take him further than even he would have expected. Psy started off 2008 with releasing a song called Happy Dreams onto his Musi on the 16th of January, which he said was a pop post-rock song. For this, he said he was depressed in various ways when he composed the song, and this was the result of him thinking of something that would make him feel better. It's always amazing to see the effect that music has on people, and this song is no exception. Good vibes all around with an amazing sounding guitar. The guitar actually uses the guitar feature on DCX Mania to give a visual representation of the notes being played, which I think is a nice touch. This song was added to the DCX Starter Pack in July of 2013, which is a music pack that all players start off with. Also, remember how I said Psy was beginning to take music more seriously? Well, to further prove this, on February the 14th, 2008, Valentine's Day, Psy entered a new doujin circle called 100 Sec Records to publish more music under. For those that don't know, a doujin circle is a term used to describe independent pieces of work, which can be anywhere from manga or novels to, of course, music. On his Musi page, he links to a website which gives us the following description about the circle. This is the homepage of the doujin music circle, 100 Sec Records. We will do various things with various people, such as music distribution on the net and distribution of CDs. The pieces were slowly starting to fall into place for Psy to take off. Just 1 month later, a new contest was announced that Psy took note of. This was a new BMS event, and would end up being the beginning of Psy's journey into producing BMS charts. I assume Psy came across this because of his ties with DTX Mania, since they're so similar. This event was called Max Beat. Now, for those that don't know how BMS events work, I explained it a bit in my last video on Topazolite, using an example of the BMS of Fighters. The BMS of Fighters is a contest that allows artists to form teams to produce music in a format called BMS, which stands for B Music Source, and is a format originally created for use by the Beatmania series, but is now also used as a way to create music, similar to MIDI files. How is it used to create music? Well, each note in Beatmania has a sound attached to them. If you're familiar with Osu, you can imagine these as hit sounds, and the artist maps the sound they produce to each hit sound to eventually create a full song. Pretty cool, right? Once teams have been registered, they have until a certain date to begin submitting their work, and all work that's submitted is registered at a venue, which is a public website where other people can listen to your work. Within a certain amount of time, your work has to gather impressions, which is a rating of your song from one person that has a score of points between 1 and 100. Once this period ends, your average points is calculated, which is the total number of points divided by the total number of impressions of your song. The team with the highest average wins, and the teams with high placements usually have their songs picked to feature in other rhythm games. This was no different, except instead, points were now changed to either a 0 or a 1 pointer, representing yes or no, similar to judges in things like X Factor. There were also no teams, so performances had to be individual. The aim for the event was simple. All you had to do was make a BMS song with a high BPM, and it wasn't just supposed to be some cookie cutter speedcore. They said it had to be made earnestly, which means serious effort had to be put into the composition of the song to make it sound as good as possible. It wasn't exactly clear what the boundary for high BPM is, but if I were to make a safe guess, it would be at or around 200 BPM. It's not clear when exactly this event was announced either, though registration begun on the 20th March 2008 and ended 4 days later. Evaluation started when registration started and ended on the 30th. For this contest, Psy put his early talent on display and produced the first version of his most popular song today. You all know it, the happy but incredibly intense hardcore song, Freedom Dive. Here's what it sounded like originally. Technically speaking, there were still some problems with this mixing. It felt like there was way too much low end, and I can barely hear the actual bass clicks even though they're meant to be a big part of the song because it's hardcore. Obviously though, the song was still outstanding, with the main compliment being how catchy the melody was, and a very well developed chord progression throughout. Psy also left a note about the song on the venue, and in it he talked about the thought process behind the submission of the song, saying he thought this event would be mainly dark and fast songs, so he took the plunge and made bright and fast songs instead. And he revealed the BPM of the song, with the exact BPM being 222.22. He also implies that the song wasn't even originally made for BMS, and that he started making the song before the event was even announced. The timing of the event was just right, but little did he know that this coincidence would bring him on the path to dominating BMS contests for years to come. In this contest though, Psy got 25 impressions, separated into normal impressions and what's called one-line impressions, with an incredibly high average of 0.92 points. That's an amazing start for him. Not long after, the gears started to turn for Psy when it came to him contributing to rhythm games, because on the 1st of April 2008, the infamous chart for Def Piano was released onto the 4-key Flash-based rhythm game, Flash Flash Revolution. Now for those that don't know, FFR is a DDR clone implemented on Flash for people to play on their keyboard. Think of it as the OG Ilsmania, with this and Stepmania being the flagship 4-key vertical scrolling rhythm games of the time. FFR had close to 1,000 songs at the time this was released, with Def Piano being number 959, and the chart quickly gained traction because of how relentlessly difficult it was. Now I know a lot of you out there don't play VSRGs, so let me put this into perspective using FFR's difficulty system. Originally, FFR had a 1 to 13 difficulty point system, with 1 being the easiest and 13 being the hardest, and Def Piano was released under difficulty 12. Bearing in mind there was only one file rated as difficulty 13, a joke impossible chart called Vertex Beta version Ruffle. It was later changed to 13 after some difficulty rebalancing, but soon it was decided that there needed to be far more differentiation and accuracy between the difficulties of charts, since for example, charts far easier than Def Piano will still have the same difficulty as it. So the 1 to 99 difficulty scale was introduced. The songs that used to be around difficulty 12 were put around 80 or 90, however only 11 songs went beyond that, and only 3 of those songs were rated at 95 or higher. Def Piano was one of these songs, alongside the infamous Rattle chart, and version Ruffle, as mentioned before, placed at an obvious 99. In 2016, the FFR difficulty system went through another change for an even more accurate representation, changing from difficulty 1 to 99 to 1 to 120, and this is the system in place today. Def Piano is currently rated at 109, which doesn't seem as hard as before, especially considering there are many more charts more difficult than that available now. However, the twist is that all of these charts have all been released recently. Every single chart at or above 109 was released after 2016, except Def Piano, released in 2008, and it's the only chart from the time, bar version Ruffle, that's anywhere near that high. To top it off, there have only been 3 known players that managed to record a run with less than 10 goods. Miyuka, who's currently considered as one of the best 4-key players of all time, and got 2 unfortunate misses. Thusar, a player that was well ahead of his time, getting a god run on the chart in 2011, and setting a record that remained untouched until 2019, when Steady Fango joined the site, and not only beat Thusar by about 1 good, but also shattered numerous records on some of the most difficult songs and caused an entirely new skill division to be created. What exactly made it so difficult though, you might be wondering? Well, apart from the polyrhythms, the awkward jump jacks, and whatever the hell this is, there was the ending. 170 BPM trills on the left and right lane, on an engine notorious for its lag and frame-based timing. Ask anyone that plays or has played FFR actively. The amount of good runs the ending has killed is ridiculous, and it sucks knowing that it may not have even been the player's fault. Regardless, this chart became synonymous with impossible levels of difficulty, both inside and outside the 4Key community, and contributed in getting Psy to where he is today. FFR would soon start to get a lot of traction due to how popular Flash-based games were at the time, and the game had very close ties with the Stepmania community, so Psy's work would soon get on there as a result. After this, Psy didn't upload anything for several months, perhaps taking a break after all that work. That is until the announcement of the biggest BMS event of all time, on September the 20th, 2008, the BMS of Fighters. This year's BMS of Fighters was a special one because there wasn't a BMS of Fighters in the year before, so a lot of hype had been built around the return of such a beloved event. After having some success in Max Beat, Psy decided to set his eyes on the event and signed up as a one-man team, simply under the name, For this contest he produced Up in the Air, an uplifting house song that sounds like this. This is a pretty chill song that puts its own spin on the house genre, with strong melodies as usual and some pretty cool use of record scratching in some of the sections. There were a few main criticisms from some of the impressions though, mainly about how the brass has been cut in some of the notes, but other than that, the song itself was still well received, getting 33 impressions with an average of 71 points. This had potential to get his team in a fairly high ranking, but since this was a BMS of Fighters, Psy had to produce 3 songs to get a placement, and unfortunately Psy could only produce 1 song due to being hospitalized 1 month before the contest. There was even an extension for the deadline, and he said if it wasn't for the fact that the contest got extended, he might not have been able to submit at all. This unfortunately meant his one-man team would place 51st out of the 53 teams registered, but individually, Up in the Air scored 37th out of the 154 songs submitted in terms of overall points, which is really impressive even under normal circumstances, and huge respect to him for pushing on with the competition despite what he was going through. Psy then took another big break, assumingly because of his situation, and didn't upload anything new onto his Musi until the 15th of February 2009, when he uploaded a post-rock song titled EM. The note for this simply said, "The End of a World." From that, you might be able to guess which one of his songs this was an early version of. Yep, the first arrangement of the beloved Happy End of the World was released, and it turns out this was made for a much smaller BMS contest called VFPQ No. 1. There are no themes or specific rules for this. It was just a classic BMS contest that used a 3-point impression system where you could make whatever you want, and there were some prizes for the winners of the contest, though I couldn't find what those prizes were. The song honestly feels like a journey, starting off with a somber piano melody backed by some mesmerizing strings that builds up to an emotional section led by an incredibly powerful guitar. I honestly don't know how to feel this section emotionally, and this conflict of emotion brings a great message to me, to the whole end of the world theme. One second you feel like reflecting back on your life on Earth and become sad that it's coming to a close, but on the other second it feels like the epitome of not crying because it's over, but smiling because it happened. Although the song itself still has some issues, for example there were some problems with mixing, and a big criticism was the instrument sounding cheap, likely due to the limitations of DTX Mania. Despite all of this, it touched the hearts of many and ended up placing 8th out of the 35 songs submitted to the competition, with 30 impressions and an average of 2.37 points. Not bad at all. On May 5th, 2009, an album was released onto a label called Diverse System. Diverse System was known for the rearrangements of certain artists' tracks, such as Course K and DJ Taka. This album in particular was called Dear Mr. Ryu, which is an album of rearrangements of tracks created by another artist called Ryu, who some of you may know as one of the creators of the track Go Beyond, alongside Sota Fujimori. In fact, for this album, Psy released a jazzy remix of Go Beyond, completely changing the arrangement of the song and adding a very Psy-esque spin to it. Have a listen. This is one of the tracks that I think is super underrated, but it can't be found anywhere that I know of, other than on Flash Revolution, which was added onto the site in 2013. I'm pretty sure the reason for this is because Diverse System received a cease and desist order from Konami in 2010 after the release of an album called Dear Mr. Whack. This caused them to shift into creating original albums instead of remixes, and I assume this eventually led to them taking down past arrangements. But nonetheless, this was a very energetic remix, and it was important because this was the first time Psy collaborated with the Diverse System label out of many that will follow. Another period of inactivity followed, and Psy returned once again to the BMS of Fighters for the 2009 edition in September. I'm sure you know the drill by now. This BMS of Fighters was dubbed as revolutionary because there were some big changes to the rules. Regulations became stricter, distribution of the BMS files produced was allowed again since this was stopped after 2006, and the biggest change of all being that up to 1,000 points can now be awarded per impression. Psy joined again under a two-man team, with the other member being Niue for background art. The team was called This, which translates to flower or something, and this time he produced 3 songs alone for the competition, each of them being an indicator of Psy's evolving style and very rapid improvement. First we have Time Flies, a song with a genre simply described as happy, though I would call it happy breakcore because it has many elements of it. This was actually Psy's first venture into breakcore, and there's something oddly satisfying about taking a complex melody like that and adding fast, sliced-up breakbeats to it. A lot of people have compared the melody to Freedom Dive, with some even asking if it's a remix of it, which just goes to show how distinct Psy's style was started to become. Afterwards, we have Mirage Garden, a progressive fusion rock song, and well, we'll have a listen. One of the things you notice right away is how unusual the timings are for this song, and according to my calculations, the time signature for this song changes between 30-116, since it's missing 1/16th notes every other beat, and 7/8 timing, which is extremely unusual and abstract. The song itself is extremely well done, with the guitar melody developing itself further and further every second in ways you can't predict. There's also a piano that's in unison with the guitar, and this unison breaks in full force in a ridiculous piano solo near the end. Combine this with the crisp sounding drum kit, which in some parts of the song switches to an almost jazzy feel, and the much improved dynamics, and you have this honestly very underrated masterpiece from Psy. Something really cool I noticed near the end of the full version of the song, which was released as part of a BMS 2009 compilation album called Groundbreaking 2009 in December of that year. For a very short time in the song, there's a recognizable melody near the end if you listen to a lot of Psy. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, it'll make sense later. Finally, we have the first version of one of his most popular songs today. Ladies and gents, I present to you Ascension to Heaven. This was Psy's take on the genre of artscore, a genre known for combining elements of experimental electronic music and heavy acoustic or classical leads. Honestly, I'm at a bit of a loss of how beautiful this track is, and this really started to put my attention on something that tends to go under the radar with the production of these songs: the story being told. EM was a good example of this storytelling, but this bumps it up to the next level, starting off with a relatively calm piano intro that then transitions into an explosive breakcore with a very chaotic time signature. You can see that the background art also begins flashing red. Clearly this indicates that something somewhere has started going wrong. The song then moves on to a piano rush section, with the drums becoming less intense but still being loud enough to recognize, though I wish they were slightly more powerful, and an almost choir-like violin accompanying the lead. A message is displayed on the background art of the song. It's a bit hard to read, but I believe it says, "When I died sometime soon, whether it will be heaven that I go or to hell, I cannot know the answer. In other words, only God knows." I believe this is what caused the background art to flash red originally, and for the song to take such an intense direction. The conflict of not knowing which direction you'll be going when you die caused a feeling of both distress and possibly happiness on the person being described here. The song then moves on to a calm and honestly depressing piano section, and the background art switches yet again, asking the following questions. Why does the person live? Why does the person die? Why do you resist the fate while understanding that I die? The person is now questioning why there's a state of death in the first place. After all, if there was no such thing as death, there would be no state of living in the first place, right? The person also asks why we resist death at all, when we all understand that death is inevitable. Violins then begin to play, giving the track an almost angelic feel to it, and the background art changes its message again to this. As for you, the one that leaves the position to fate will be comfortable. Nonetheless, I will carve with the end here if I resist it. which tells the listeners that if you understand that death is something that you can't avoid, you'll be comfortable and will live life without constantly worrying about the day you die. But if you resist your fate, your life will be carved around that fact. Hence the saying of carving with the end. In other words, he's saying that it's because of the fact that you know that death is inevitable, not that you fear that death is inevitable, and try to resist that fate, when you no longer take your life for granted. And when the time does come for you to go, you'll be able to ascend with no regrets, regardless of where it takes you. The climax of the song reflects on this nicely, and the end of a sad piano. Something about the melody just screams of loneliness to me, which I think could either be related to the people you end up leaving behind, or to the person that supposedly died himself. The song then closes. That was my interpretation of the song and the background art when I first listened to it. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are on it. It's 100% overanalyzing, but it was also incredibly interesting to look into. Also, fun fact, in the readme for the BMS file, Psy said this is a melody he was working on for about a year. That's insane work from him. Anyways, this song was deemed an amazing song by many, rightfully so, and was the highest rated song out of the 3 songs he produced, with Mirage Garden following after it. All of his works combined gave him a total of 167,589 points, with 190 impressions that have an average of 882 points per impression, all of which puts him in 15th out of 70 teams. Impressive, and lots more people were starting to recognize Psy's ability, but of course, this is still only just the beginning. 2010 then ends up rolling around, and this is the year Psy really begun to be recognized as a master of his craft. The year begun with Psy participating in the sequel to Max Beat, Extreme Beat, on February of 2010. The contest had the same rules as before, but this time the scoring system is explained. It turns out the score actually depends on the BPM of the song, as well as the number of yeses and nos the song gets. The full formula is here. Recommendations are a yes and non-recommendations are a no. This score is then called a distance in kilometers, as you can see. For this contest, Psy took what he usually does to the extreme and decided to produce a 357 BPM jazz fusion track. On paper, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but he executes it amazingly. Well, almost amazingly. In case you haven't guessed, yes, for this event, Psy produced .357 Magnum. Okay, so upon hearing this, some of you may be thinking this doesn't sound anywhere close to 357 BPM. This was actually the biggest complaint of this song at the event. Many people were claiming that the song was actually half the BPM at 178.5 BPM. And to be honest, I'm inclined to agree with this. I used both a 357 BPM and a 178.5 BPM metronome on the song, and you can clearly tell the 357 BPM metronome clicks represent the 8th notes of the song, whilst the 178.5 metronome measures the quarter notes. This means that they're both on time with the song. So which one is the correct BPM? It has to be 178.5 BPM, because the song is in 4/4 time, since you can count 4 quarter notes before reaching a downbeat. A downbeat is usually a strong, accented beat that represents the beginning of a bar. And as we've established, 178.5 BPM metronome clicks represent the song's quarter notes. You can even see this at the beginning of the song with the open hi-hats. In fact, they match up perfectly with the clicks of a 178.5 BPM metronome. In the readme files for the BMS score, Psy responds by saying that if you listen to the drum swings are about as fast as 357 BPM. And even though this would be true on its own, in this case the swings don't really affect the pace of the song. Regardless, the song itself is an amazing tune. It's super energetic since 178.5 BPM is still pretty fast, and the melody uses a combination of the violin, piano, and bass guitar to create a feeling of extravagance. The gunshot sounds before every section just adds to the hype this builds even more, and it all fits perfectly with the title of the song. Also, this was the song that used the phrase from the Mirage Garden full version. Everyone that heard the song during the contest recognized how good it was, and despite the complaints, it was deemed a masterpiece and ended up actually winning. That's right, Psy just won his first BMS contest. Honestly, a huge jump compared to his last placements, and this is when he would begin to kinda blow up as a composer. This was certainly not his last one either, because afterwards, the fated BMS contest finally arrived. The BMS contest that would change Psy's life forever. The BMS of Fighters 2010, Evolution of War. The rules remained the same, and Psy joined with 6 other people, a group of artists called Grandfall, which consisted of Careless, Ino, and Kosaki for background art, Identity 7, who helped with background art alongside Mio, Yamako, who also helped with background art, and Colorful Sound Support, another group of composers who some of you may have heard of. This team went by the name Lyrical Signal, and after this event, that name would end up being infamous in the BMS scene. That's because this team ended up being a powerhouse in the contest, and not only did they end up being the only team in the competition, with all songs finishing above 100,000 points, but they also went far, far beyond that. The first song by the team was by Colorful Sound Support, called Fusion Ragin'. The genre for this was classical crossover pop, and it sounded very much like a classic J. Cole mix with a J-pop song. This ended up scoring 122,408 points, with a 963 points average, and this was the song that got the least amount of points on the team, but it still ended up at 9th place out of the 278 individual songs submitted. That should give you an idea of just how badly these guys swept this contest. The next biggest song was a song called Eris by Grandfall. This was meant to be in the style of an OST. Listening to it feels like an incredible, progressive, orchestral soundtrack, and I can imagine this being the OST to an RPG battle or something similar. This ended up getting 149,102 points, with a 961 point average, getting 3rd out of all the songs. But then we have the hardest carry seen in BMS history by Psy. For the contest, he produced one of his most popular tracks, and with it he pretty much paved the way for an entirely new style of rhythm game music, and music in general. I present to you, Halcyon. Halcyon is a song that's based on the admittedly weird Greek mythology of Alcyone, the daughter of Aeolus. The story goes that she was living happily with her husband, Cex, and they often used to refer to themselves as Hera and Zeus respectively, since Zeus and Hera were also a couple, until one day, Zeus became angry with them because of this, and threw a thunderbolt at Cex's ship while he was at sea. Morpheus, the god of dreams, then appeared to Alcyone as an apparition of Cex to tell her what happened, and overwhelmed with grief, Alcyone threw herself into the sea. After learning of this, the gods ended up taking pity on them, and turned them both into kingfishers to reunite them. The track Halcyon was created in the image of these kingfishers. With Psy saying in the readme, the song was created with the image of a bird that flies through the sky at high speed, and the background art tells the story, matching very well with the music. The song itself is pretty similar to Artcore, using a combination of the piano, violin, and some really cool synths near the middle to create a beautiful feeling of soaring through skies. You can also hear drum breaks in the background that give the song a bit more energy, and the clever usage of the bass kick during the breakdowns are similar to what you would find in a hardcore song, hence the genre that no one had heard before, Renaissance Hardcore. In fact, in the readme, Psy says that he asked a friend for what genre this song would fit into, and his friend said it didn't fit into any, so they created their own. This song shook the competition, getting 213 impressions with a 959 point average, giving a total of 204,325 points. This was absolutely enough to not only carry his team to victory, but also create a power gap of over 150,000 points between the first and second place teams. Not only that, but Halcyon dominated the individual leaderboards, holding the champion position with just under a 50,000 point lead. After managing all of this, Psy became a celebrity in the BMS scene, and he gained much more fans for his music from that single event alone. His dreams were starting to be realised, and he certainly wasn't going to stop there, as he began to hit his peak activity in the following year. In fact, in 2011, he went on a pretty crazy streak of BMS events and making music in general. To start off 2011, in April, Psy participated in not a BMS event, but a PMS contest. This is a contest that had the same format as BMS contests, but instead you have to produce what's called a PMS file, which is a derivation of BMS files designed for poppin' music games. In order to run these files, you had to download a custom version of Lunatic Rave 2, which is a popular rhythm game that actually uses BMS and is very similar to Beatmania. This custom version was called Light Pop. Back to the topic, this contest was called the Spring 9 Keys Road 2011, and you could produce whatever you wanted as long as you followed the rules. Psy decided to stick to his roots and produce a nice, slow jazz piece called Beatrice. The song was made in the image of a witch, with Psy saying this is supposed to give an adult atmosphere. This felt like a much slower, more relaxing version of Mirage Garden, and there's not much to be said about it other than the weird time signatures, which Psy himself said was him experimenting with 11-beat time signatures. This song ended up placing 4th in the competition. Psy took part in what's called Mutual Faith. This was a BMS contest that required you to collab with at least one other person and try to create a BMS file with them. Any solo works were forbidden and grounds for instant disqualification. Psy teamed up with another artist who went by Mono, and together they formed the duo Omnipotenx. The reasoning behind the name is because it had all the letters from Mono and Psy, and the duo created one of the most bizarrely catchy songs I've heard to this day, called Peacebreaker. Peacebreaker was made by the duo wanting to combine orchestra with a genre called trance. Mono was in charge of the trance background track, which by the sounds of it seems like it's Mono himself that did the voice, while Psy was in charge of the song structure, the synths, the strings, and more. Both of these combined to make this very powerful track, and to be honest, it's one of those tracks you listen to at first, think it's complete garbage, then after a couple more listens you start to really enjoy. The kick was a bit low volume for something that's trance, and this reflected in some of the impressions. But otherwise this was yet another hit, getting 62 impressions and managing to win the competition. Then came what is personally my favourite BMS fighters of all time. The Intersection of Conflict took place on October of 2011. The team Psy registered with was largely the same as last year, with a few changes. Kozagi was now replaced with Little Egret, Mio was now replaced with Shitake, and Yamako was replaced with Wombi. This was the return of Lyrical Signal Revival. After last year's victory, they were back, and they were back for blood, though this time the contest wouldn't be so easy. To give you an idea of the competition this time, first we had the team, we still don't know the name of the song we listened to that day, which had Tsurumaru and the OG rhythm game artist, Cranky, and it was for this competition those two created a song that's in literally every rhythm game ever, Conflict. Then we had a team called Free Eyed, which had the person who's currently considered one of the best artcore creators of our time, Sakujo. And for this contest he produced 3 classics, Neurotoxin, Velista, and Laplace. Finally we had a team called Rear Charge, which had Void, Junk, and P-Star Light, and they released Alt Assist, Pop and Shower, and Ocean Memory. It was going to be a tough time if they wanted to win, and they would need to go all out for it. The first song produced was, and some of you will be able to instantly recognize this, Eternal Drain by Colorful Sound Port. This was basically a parody on anime openings, with the note saying this was the opening for a made-up anime called Otoge Senshi Signario, which judging from the background art would be some sort of mecha anime. There's not much to say about the actual song itself, pretty much a classic anime opening that's pretty fun to listen to, and became iconic over the years as it started to make its way to games like Osmania. The next song produced was Solrus by Grandfall, which is given the genre R and Balkan by them. As you can tell, the song has a very medieval, folklore style to it, and the vocals really support it in giving that feeling of going on some sort of grand journey, which is what the story in the background art is about. And finally we have Psy's piece. The song's genre is called Apocalypsis Johannes, which isn't actually a genre but is actually a reference to the book that shares the same name. This is a book written in the 15th century in the Dutch or Rhine region, and it was written by someone who wanted to express the thrilling imagery of the apocalypse. The book actually kind of resembles a comic book, with there being a lot of usage of pictures and captions to allow for literate or semi-literate people to read. The theme of the apocalypse is not only shown in the note for the song, but also in the background art, with the story referencing the New Testament's apocalypse in the John book of the Bible. All of this is then expressed in what Psy called parousia. The sounds the song uses is similar to last year's Halcyon, but instead of a feeling of uplifting and soaring high into the sky, the melody gives a feeling of dread and feels like a signal that something world-ending is on its way. What really took me by surprise when I first listened to the song was the use of wobbles, just to make this sound a bit more unique. Have a listen. I had no idea Psy was capable of this, and while some may argue that this is out of place for the theme of the song, I think it was a neat addition that blends into the song, especially towards the end. The name Parousia was also another interesting choice for the name of the song, because the word actually directly refers to Judgment Day and the second coming of Christ, whose cross is shown multiple times in the song's background art. The song was incredibly well received yet again, and ended up placing third out of all the songs in the competition, which this time was 372 total. The other songs did fairly well as well, with Stardust placing 6th and Eternal Drain placing 16th. However, unfortunately this wasn't enough to claim first place, and they were only able to get 5th with the points they had. Well, I say only, but that was out of 129 teams, which is incredible. Psy would go on to participate in many more BMS contests, still maintaining high placements or even winning some of them, and from there he became a celebrity in the BMS world. This directly translated to him becoming a known figure in the world of rhythm games globally, and in order to support this, Psy began to release albums onto 100 Sec Records, which contained some original works and some remastered works of his past BMS achievements. So far, Psy has released 5 albums, each of them as good as the last. Let's start off with the album that many consider to be the greatest album of rhythm game music ever released, Parousia. As you can tell, the album shares the same name as the song we just discussed. It was released on the 30th of October 2013 and mainly consisted of remasters of all of Psy's past work, in which the sound quality is improved on, and in some songs entirely new sections were added to extend it. Some examples of this was Freedom Dive, Ascension to Heaven, and Halcyon. There are also some remasters of songs that were exclusively from his music, such as Blue Zenith and Finders Keepers, which is a jazz fusion song released onto the site in September 29, 2009. But this album really felt like the culmination of Psy's work from the past years, and the album got a lot of attention from rhythm games. For example, in 2012 a mobile rhythm game called Citus was released. The game was simple. Whenever the scrolling line reached the center of any of the circles present on screen, you had to hit that circle, and this was used to judge your timing. Halcyon was released as part of this game, added to Chapter 3 with 2 charts, an easy chart and a hard chart. The hard chart was considered by many to be extremely difficult at the time, and because of that the song ended up going viral on YouTube when a player named Shokowa K got 1 million on it, which is a fully perfect score. I'm sure you guys also all know about Freedom Dive and Blue Zenith, which had very difficult OS maps created for them. In fact, both of these songs went viral in 2016 when Cookie Easy dominated their respective 4 dimensions difficulty with the hard rock mod. In particular, Freedom Dive, being the first 800pp play to be ever set, ended up being synonymous with Psy's name for a while due to this. A lot of these songs would thus end up making their way to many more rhythm games, such as My My, Sound Vortex, and Mustache, and so would a lot of the songs from his later albums. To summarize, if you were to ask a Psy fan to name their favourite song from him, you would likely get a song from this album. It's just that good, and there's a reason I used it as the thumbnail of the video. The next album Psy released was Agartha, on October 27, 2013. This album was similar to last time, in that it had a mixture of songs from past BMS events, and some completely new. The name shares the title of a song in the album as well, just like last time, and it has a pretty cool meaning. Agartha is said to be a legendary kingdom that's located right at Earth's core, and it's related to the belief that the Earth is actually hollow. To those that are fans of MonsterVerse, it's just like the Hollow Earth seen in the recent Godzilla vs Kong, except this was an actual theory that was believed until it was disproven in the 17th century, and Agartha was a myth created from this theory from a French occultist named Alexandre Saint-Vest d'Alvedre in the 19th century. The song Agartha is your classic Psy art score. It has the same style as Halcyon and Parousia, but this time the melody has a very grand feeling to it, kinda like you've just discovered a great treasure you've been searching for your whole life. Even though personally I prefer the previous 2 Renaissance hardcore songs, Agartha is still an incredible track to listen to, and seeing the progress in Psy's style of this sort of music is really satisfying to watch. Next we have this, a jazz fusion track mainly using the piano as a lead. By no means am I exaggerating when I say this. This is one of the most beautiful chord progressions I've ever heard, and when I first heard it, I'll admit, I was addicted to it. In fact, if you've watched to this point, you know that Psy has a solid history of jazz fusion, and I'm pretty comfortable with saying this is the best one I've heard so far. The piano duet, the bass guitar, the drums, which have perfect dynamics by the way, everything just meshes so well together, more so than ever. Not to mention this godly bridge section. Do I even need to say anything about that? And yes, I think this is even better than the song I'm about to show you. Another jazz fusion track called Valhalla. Valhalla is a song that was actually first created for the BMS of Fighters 2012. In the contest, the score actually suffered slightly, with many people complaining about the volume and how the song wasn't as powerful as its past works. But it still did very well, and the song got 7th in the competition out of nearly 400 songs, which helped his team 234 Trident score 2nd place overall. This is the remastered version of that. There's not much to be said about the song itself. It sounds like a more intense version of .357 Magnum, and although the song doesn't really stand out as much considering what we've seen from Psy already, it's still an incredibly fun listen. This, alongside Seamless, feels super underrated, and I was pleasantly surprised when I heard them. The album also contains a trance song called Information Transmission, Happy End of the World, which is a complete remaster of EM. Seriously, listen to it. And more. Overall, a solid album. I don't think it's quite at the level of Parosia yet, but it's still pretty close, and very high quality. Songs in this album have featured on the rhythm games mentioned before, with the highlights of the album being Happy End of the World, which has popular map sets on OS Standard and OS Mania. Afterwards we have World Fragments, released on New Year's Eve 2015. There was a bit of a change with this one. This time, Psy's album was released under the Diverse System label instead, that one label Psy collabed with for the Go Beyond remix. Psy ended up joining their label because in March of 2014, the 100 Sec Records ended up shutting down. It's unclear what happened, but Psy tweeted about it on his Twitter, and sometime in between that day and the release of the album, he joined Diverse System, and is with them until today. This album contains some more classic Psy article songs, with the highlights of the album being Anima and Aragami. Aragami was first made as part of the BMS of Fighters 2014, which was actually dubbed as Go Back to Your Roots 2014. Basically, since this was the 10-year anniversary of the BMS of Fighters, the organisers decided to reload the first ever BMS that took place in 2004, by making it so that the rules of this year are the exact same as it was back then. Obviously this meant a bunch of changes to the contest, with the biggest change of all being that it was now forbidden for you to work with less than 3 BMS creators on the team. But the scoring system seemed to remain the same, with Impression still having a 1000 point cap, unlike before when it had 100. Psy was a part of a team called Noran Nekosai, with 10 other people, and his team came 2nd in the competition, with the song getting 2nd overall out of all the individual songs. Here's what it sounds like in the album. Apart from the song's powerful lead and the hardcore track going on at the back, the thing that gave me the most goosebumps was that piano in the background. It's something that you don't really take note of at first because of its volume, but when you do, that's when the song goes from decent to amazing. Anima is probably the most known track from this album, boasting over 1 million streams on Spotify. I think this is mainly from it being a very difficult chart on Demo and going viral from that. This song also has elements of hardcore, but it has even more of a piano rush than Origami. In fact, this song is pretty much one huge piano solo over a hardcore track. We also have another jazz fusion track from him called Double Helix, a collaboration with Nowhere to R called Dreadnought, and a 10-minute progressive Renaissance hardcore track called World Fragments, split into 3 parts. All 3 parts are great to listen to. The only real criticism is that for me, parts 1 and 2 sound way too similar in atmosphere. Part 3 is easily the best for me. The melody used in the chorus really strikes a chord with me, and generally speaking it was more exciting than the other 2 parts. All of this and more is found in this album, which is a mediocre but solid release from Psy, with the style not wavering in the slightest. Next we had Evolved Chronicles, which released on December 31st, 2016, exactly 1 year after World Fragments. Compared to his other albums, this one definitely feels like it went under the radar, which I guess is understandable. The consistency between songs wasn't quite there compared to his previous work, but there were still some really good tracks on there. To start with, we have Solo Storm. This song is fantastic to say the least. The song starts with a chilling choir, feeling like something straight out of the most intense movie soundtrack you can find. It then slowly transitions into a combination of trance and artcore at an incredibly fast 200 BPM with a piano lead. That's a piano lead in 200 BPM and managing to keep up. That's ridiculous. There was also Northward, which is a chill trance song that had some pretty cool violins I enjoyed. I also really liked the touch of the 808s in the background that had some attack on them, giving it that extra atmosphere. This is honestly one of my favourite tracks from this album. It wasn't exactly memorable or anything, it was just one I thought deserved some mention because it was one I really enjoyed. Jackknife was also in the same book. Again, your classic Psy artcore, but something about the melody and tempo just makes it super entertaining. Like before, it's not exactly memorable, but it's definitely a good song. Then we have Glorious Crown. This 225 BPM beast was actually a sequel to Freedom Dive. In fact, a complete rearrangement of it, even using some of the melodies from Freedom Dive in the song. To be honest, I don't think this really adds anything to Freedom Dive, since on its own it's a really good song. But nonetheless, it's still pretty cool that Psy decided to actually recreate one of his most popular songs. This song was also certainly the highlight of this album, alongside Solar-Storm, because not only does this have a very difficult Citus 2 chart, but it also has one of the most physically demanding My levels I've ever seen. The rest of the album was alright, I guess. I don't know, they felt pretty unremarkable to me. They definitely weren't bad, but it just didn't hit as hard as Psy stuff usually does, and it all felt like they sounded the same. Regardless, I still enjoy listening through this album, and would recommend you check it out. Finally, we have Psy's latest album, as of April 2021, Cutis Ray, and it didn't disappoint at all. It released on December 30th, 2018, and the name shares titles of the song in the album. This song was originally created around 2013 as part of the Sound Vortex 2 Original Song Contest, and added as part of Sound Vortex 2 in September of that year as a winner. There was a comment on the song by Psy that describes the theme of the track. As for the song, it is a near-future laser beam theme song. It is an image of a battleship firing a large number of beams in the final blow, and overkilling the enemy. While working on my specialty, I put strength into SE, rhythm and gimmick, and ended with a high tension song running with momentum. I would be happy if you enjoy it. That sums the song up perfectly, using a laser-like synth to give the song a futuristic feel, and the track never slows down or stops developing. Although the song isn't quite as popular as some of his other classics, this is still one of Psy's most well-received songs, with some even comparing it to Pyrosia. There's also some Renaissance hardcore in the album as usual, with a track called Bad Elixir being released. Bad Elixir was made for the Go Back to Your Roots event in 2018, where he was part of the unstoppable trio called Herbicide, which consisted of Psy, Leaf, and Sakujo. The song actually comes from a clever afterthought from Psy. Psy says in the readme for the song that Elixir can be found as a recovery item in various games, but there's no such thing in real life, and there are always side effects when you take a drink that makes you feel better. This song is inspired by those things, and it's about to empty your HP, MP, and gauge. In other words, Psy creates the song in the image of drinking something that you think makes you feel better, but actually does the opposite, and it's a clever way of linking the song with the name and theme of the team. Not only that, but the song also has a bit of a boss theme, both at the ending of that statement and the melody in the track. It's pretty much what you expect from Psy. There's nothing to be said about it that hasn't been said already, and although it's not as memorable as some of his past work, it's still a great song to listen to, and I really like the melody. The final song we'll look at in this video is a 212 BPM speedcore track called Longinus. Well, to be fair, 212 BPM is just barely speedcore, and I wasn't quite sure on what to deem it until I heard this. Yeah, I don't need to say much else, do I? What's even more impressive is how the piano is managing to keep up with each and every bass kick. It's insane that Psy is able to do that, and maintain such a consistently good melody throughout. In fact, the entire song is pretty much Psy going back to his piano roots, showing off his skills with a duet piano on top of a high energy hardcore track. This song was also very well received. Not only was it added onto Demo, but it also has a YouTube video with 1.2 million views as of recording. The rest of the album mainly consists of remixes and collaborations. For example, there's a really good hardstyle collaboration with Ferry Quitus, who's another member of the Diverse System label, called Cyberspace. There's also a very well done dubstep remix of Parosia by Black Lolita. Generally speaking, the album is a good comeback from Evolved Chronicles, and I definitely recommend you to have a listen. With all the works I've mentioned, alongside the work that I skipped over to make the video's length reasonable, there's not a single doubt in my mind that Psy is not only a legend within the rhythm game scene, but within the world of composition and music production in general. He's proven himself to be a complete master of artcore and classical, and I hope that seeing the progression of his music has given you a newfound appreciation for Psy's work. I also hope you see beyond it just being super hard rhythm game music. His music truly has his heart and soul poured into it, and his ability to experiment with new sounds has given him an amazing and unique way of expressing himself. With that being said, I truly hope he never stops music production, and I'm sure a lot of you look forward to the future music of Yusuke Ishiwata. If you watched up to this point, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and comment on who you want to see in the future. If you didn't enjoy, leave a dislike and let me know what you'd like to see changed. I'm always open to suggestions and improving my videos. Also, be sure to support Psy's music and the Diverse System label. Links to their platforms are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in a bit.